Okay, we are on chapter 10, Sif 8, and we're in the middle of the laws of putting on tefillin. Also, lahafsik b'sicha. It's forbidden to talk between putting on the shal yad and the shal rosh. Even gesturing with the eyes or snapping the fingers is forbidden. You're not allowed to make any interruption in between the putting on the tefillin of the hand and the head one. Why not? For it says in the pasuk, "V'hoya lechana eis al yadcha u'lezikarim beinenecha." It shall be as a sign upon your hand and a remembrance between your eyes. So the remembrance requires that the instantaneous putting of the shal yad after the shal rosh, in order that it be one continuum for both of them. So it's kind of a specific of the word of the pasuk, which is a little bit lost in the translation, but it's sort of it shall be in the singular. So the remembrance of the sign on your hand and the remembrance between your eyes are in the singular. It shall be. So it has to be one action, one project, so to speak, to put on both the hand and the head tefillin, and therefore any interruption in between them is forbidden. Now, because this is, so he's, okay, he'll get to that in a moment. Even if you hear Kaddish or Kedusha, you may not interrupt, but rather remain silent and concentrate on what the congregation is saying. This is not the opinion of the Alter Rebbe. Actually, the Alter Rebbe in Shulchan Aruch says the same thing, but the Alter Rebbe in the Siddur, which, as we've discussed many times, the Siddur was written after the Shulchan Aruch and constitutes the Alter Rebbe's later opinion. Often he changed his mind about things. So the Alter Rebbe in the Siddur says that if you hear things which are in the status of Kedusha, which are in the status of Kaddish or Kedusha, namely interruptions which are requirements. We're going to see later, I think it's in chapter 14. Yeah, we're going to see that there's different statuses of things. Some things are considered accustomed to say, like Baruch Hu Baruch Shemai. Some things are an obligation. Some things are an even stricter obligation. So Kaddish and Kedusha is the highest level of obligation to respond when you hear them being said. We're going to go through them in greater detail in chapter 14. So if you are in the middle of putting on your tefillin and the chazan starts saying Kaddish, so then you may answer Amen Yehei Shmei Rabbah. Not only you may, but according to the Alter Rebbe, you must answer the Amen Yehei Shmei Rabbah, the Amen of the Kaddish, and then because so you must say that. Then once you've already said an interruption, so according to the Chabad custom, that generally we only say one bracha when we put on tefillin, l'haniach tefillin, and that bracha covers both the hand and the head tefillin. But in a situation where you interrupted, so you started putting on your hand tefillin and you heard Kaddish and you answered Amen Yehei Shmei Rabbah, and now you're going to put on your head tefillin, so then you have to make another bracha on the head tefillin, which is the bracha Asher Kedeshanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu al mitzvahs tefillin. Okay. However, if you hear someone reciting the bracha l'haniach tefillin, you may respond with Amen, since the response of Amen is an affirmation that you believe in the mitzvah of tefillin, and this is considered one continuum. So even though other amens would not be okay, even according to the Alter Rebbe, only the most strict level, Kaddish, Kedusha, probably Baruch Hu, and certain amens, but not a regular amen for a bracha. But the amen of if you hear the guy next to you says l'haniach tefillin, and you're in the middle of putting on tefillin, then you may say amen, because amen on the bracha of l'haniach tefillin is not an interruption in between tefillin. That's also part of the same enterprise. Regarding the tefillin of Rabbi Tam, it is likewise forbidden to interrupt between putting the shal rosh and the shal yad, but you may interrupt for Kaddish and Kedusha, right? So even the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, who's more strict with the Rashi, he agrees that with Rabbi Tam, you may say Kaddish and Kedusha, and certainly that would be true to the Alter Rebbe's opinion as well. So I think some people make a mistake and they think that the reason why you're not allowed to talk in between putting on the shalyad and the shalreish is because that would then require you to say an additional bracha on the shalreish. But actually, that's not the case. The reason why you're not allowed to speak is because, like we said before, it's derived from this pasuk which says "it shall be" in the singular, and because it's derived from that, it makes no difference whether it's Rashi Tefillin or Rabbeinu Tam Tefillin. And Rabbeinu Tam Tefillin, there is no bracha at all. You don't say any bracha when we wear Rabbeinu Tam Tefillin. Nevertheless, one may not make any interruption. Now, if you're in the middle of, you should try to sort of guesstimate, right? If you hear the chassan's about to start and he's going to say Kaddish, then don't start putting on tefillin. Wait till after Kaddish before you put on tefillin. But if you started putting on your tefillin, and then like you didn't realize, and suddenly that you hear, Dover Halomin Mein Yonah, and there's about to be a Kaddish, so then what you could do is you could rush and not do all the wrappings around your arm, and just quickly put on the head tefillin and wrap around your finger, and be able to answer without interrupting in between the hand and the head tefillin, and then you could go back and unwrap it and do the 7 around your forearm as appropriately. Okay. If by error you did interrupt, so move the shalyad a bit and repeat the bracha laneach tefillin and tighten the knot, and after that put in the shalosh and recite the bracha. Okay, again, that's not the way we paskin. We paskin that if you didn't interrupt for whatever reason, whether it was by error or it was by design because you heard Kaddish, you don't need to do you don't need to move or anything with the tefillin shalyad. You just make the bracha al mitzvah tefillin and put on the head tefillin. And I think I mentioned in the past, but the mitzvah. The bracha for al mitzvah tefillin on the head, you put the tefillin in place, and before you tighten it around your head, that's when you say the bracha. If the interruption was necessary to the mitzvah of tefillin, you are not required to repeat the bracha over the shalyad. Okay, this paragraph is written in the Alter Rebbe's Siddur almost verbatim. There are a couple of differences, but let's see. You should have in mind when putting on tefillin that the Holy One, blessed be He, commanded us to put on the tefillin which contain 4 sections of the Torah, in which are written the oneness of Hashem's name, blessed be He, and the exodus of Egypt. The tefillin are put on the arm, opposite the heart, and on the head, opposite the brain, in order that we remember always the miracles and wonders that He did for us, which teach us of His oneness and His power and dominion over the heavenly and earthly worlds, to do with them as He wills. It also teaches us that we must subject to Him the soul which resides in the brain, and also the heart, which is the source of the desire in our thoughts. And by doing so, we will remember the Creator and restrain our indulgences and fulfill that which is written. And you shall not turn aside after your hearts and after your eyes, not to follow the indulgences of our hearts and our eyes, which most specifically refers to heretical thoughts, and our eyes refer to sexual thoughts. So when we put on tefillin, we're supposed to have in mind all of this, that Hashem commanded us to do this mitzvah in order to remember His oneness and His dominion over the entire world, so that we are inspired to minimize our indulgences or restrain our indulgences. And He says, therefore it is written between your eyes. We know that tefillin, the Torah says to put them between your eyes, and we don't actually put them between our eyes, we put them on our heads, matching up to between our eyes, but they're not actually between our eyes. So the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch says now that the reason why the Torah expresses it in the words between your eyes is because restraining one's eyes to not look at inappropriate images is an essential element of the mitzvah of tefillin. Tefillin shal yad v'shal reish. The tefillin of the arm and of the head are 2 separate mitzvahs and are not prerequisites for each other. Therefore, if you have only one of them, or because of a particular situation you are able only to put on one of them, you must put on that one. Right? If a person has a cast all the way to the top of his arm, So then he can't do the hand tefillin, but he could do the head tefillin. If you put on the tefillin of the arm, you recite only the bracha laniach tefillin. If you put on the tefillin of the head, you recite over it the brachas, both brachas of laniach tefillin and al mitzvah tefillin, and then say Baruch Shem Kved Malchus Eloheinu Vayid. Again, that in line with what we keep on mentioning, this is not the Alter Rebbe's opinion. The Alter Rebbe's opinion is that if you would only put on the head tefillin, then you only say the bracha al mitzvahs tefillin. Yes, Dan, you wanted to ask something?
If you temporarily can't use one arm, can you put it on the other arm?
No.
So if one arm is disabled temporarily, you just don't put on the arm tefillin.
Correct.
Okay.
All right. Okay, we're going to speak here about lefties. 1 second. I wanted to mention a couple of other things. A number of things about tefillin. Maybe now's a good time to mention some things which the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch I don't think is going to talk about, but probably a good idea that we should mention them. So first of all, we had just on Sunday a fascinating presentation on the Alter Rebbe's Ksav. But now, when it comes to using the Alter Rebbe's Ksav, even though it's certainly something which the Rabbeim encouraged, but it wasn't something which was, so to speak, an absolute must. But when it comes to using the other two, there's Beis Yosef and Arizal. So Beis Yosef, like Rabbi Rabin mentioned, is the one that's most common amongst non-Hasidic Ashkenazi Jews. But for Chassidim, we're very careful, if possible, to use the Arizal's Ksav. And that we could do a whole class on that, on the Arizal's Ksav versus Beis Yosef's Ksav. But certainly something which we find the Rebbe very strongly, not just encouraging, but almost insisting on that we use the Ksav, the font of the Arizal, and so that's certainly something which one should bear in mind when buying tefillin or when checking your tefillin or upgrading your tefillin, that if you're up to upgrading your tefillin and if you bought them from somebody who wasn't going according to the Hasidic or Chabad customs, you might want to check, is your tefillin Beis Yosef or Arizal? And if it's not Arizal, then maybe you want to consider upgrading it to the Arizal Ksav. Now, here's another very important reason why, for those who follow the rulings of the Alter Rebbe, that is my camera on? No. Okay, let me stop the recording and we'll figure this out. Okay, so I want to just show you something, which is another reason why if you bought your tefillin from somebody who wasn't being careful to do it according to the Chabad rulings, that there's another thing that could be problematic. There are 4 paragraphs in the tefillin, and we know that when writing one paragraph after the other in the Torah, there are 2 types of separations that could be between them. Sometimes it's called a parsha pesucha, and sometimes it's a susuma. So if you look at this picture, for example, this is just a random column in the Torah. 1 second. Right? Can you see this? Right? So this one over here is called a closed parsha. That means there's a break, but the next quote paragraph, we call it a parsha, like what we call in English a new paragraph. But it starts in the same line. It starts in the middle of the line. The new paragraph starts in the middle of the line. And then this one is a parsha psucha, where the new paragraph starts at the beginning of the line. Now, there is a machlokus how the 4th parsha of the tefillin has to be written. And whether it should be a psucha or stuma. And there is the shita of the Taz, where in the opinion of the Taz, he comes up with a way to write it where there's a very small space at the beginning of the line, so that according to the opinion that it's supposed to start in the middle of the line, it starts in the middle of the line. According to the opinion it's supposed to start at the beginning of the line, it's such a small space that that's considered the beginning. That's the opinion of the Taz. Now, it's very complicated sugya. We're not going to get into all the details, but the Alter Rebbe writes a great length about this in two places. And the Alter Rebbe rules that the way the Taz paskins to do it is no good according to anyone, right? Again, so we have two primary opinions, the Rambam and the Rosh. The Rambam says it should be start at the beginning of the line, and the Rosh says it should start in the middle of the line, or vice versa, I forget which way. The Taz says do it where it starts just a little bit after the beginning of the line, and that way you've satisfied both the Rambam and the Rosh. Comes the Alter Rebbe and says, no, if you do it like the Taz, then you've satisfied neither the Rambam nor the Rosh. You've satisfied nobody. And so, and it's another important factor to bear in mind that if you have tefillin that were bought from a non-Chabad source, that strong chance that according to Alter Rebbe, it would not be we should be careful not to say it's not valid, because there are hundreds of thousands of Jews in the world who wear tefillin in that way, and according to, that's a valid opinion, absolutely. But as in Chabad, we're very careful about following the rulings of the Alter Rebbe, and so if you are at a place where you want to check your tefillin or upgrade your tefillin, that's certainly those two things, using the font of the Arizal and making sure you have the V'hoya Im Shemaya starting in the middle of the line in accordance with the ruling of the Alter Rebbe, then those are very certainly important factors to bear in mind. Another thing which is not going to be mentioned explicitly in the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch is borrowing tefillin. We spoke about borrowing a talis, and also you can borrow tefillin from someone. Now, it's very important when you borrow tefillin from somebody, if that's for whatever reason your tefillin are not accessible, you're borrowing somebody else's tefillin, or you're going on miftzayim. So we spoke last week that there's a very specific place where the tefillin have to be, where the head tefillin have to be at the front, and where the knot should be at the back. So there are different opinions about this, but there are letters of the Rebbe which clarify that you may change the size of the tefillin, adjust it to be a little bit bigger and a little bit smaller, and adjust it back. Some authorities are hesitant about that because they say that if you're adjusting it, so you're making a knot that was only in its place for a couple of hours or a few minutes, so that's not called a halachic knot. A halachic knot has to be there sort of long term. But the Rebbe writes in a number of letters otherwise, and that it's more important to make sure that tefillin fit you properly, so you do adjust the knot. So if you're ever in a place where you don't have your own tefillin and you're borrowing, you're in shul, you don't have your tefillin, you're just taking tefillin, then adjust the knot to fit you. And if you don't know how to do it, ask somebody else. It's really not difficult. I know it sounds daunting, but I would be happy to demonstrate. But it's quite easy to adjust the size of the tefillin, the head tefillin, to make it bigger or smaller. And you should make sure that your tefillin, whenever you're doing it, are in that way. Okay. There's also the Chabad knot for the hand tefillin, which is also important, but possibly not as important as the other things I mentioned, because the other things I mentioned certainly are certainly much more important, if we could say that, than having the Chabad knot. Okay. Let's talk about left-handed people. Sif Yud Beis, a completely left-handed person. When we say completely left-handed, we mean that everything that everybody else does with their right hand, he does with his left hand. Although he became left-handed only through habit, right? In other words, this used to be common that people. Sorry, no, this was not common. The other way around was common.
Completely left-handed, but although he became left-handed only through habit.
So where are we? So So a person, let's say he had his right hand in a cast for a long time, and he got used to doing everything with his left hand. And now, even though he's taken off the cast, he still writes with his left hand, and he does everything that most people do with their right hand, he does with his left hand. So even though it was only by habit, so it's not nature, it's nurture, nevertheless, he must put the tefillin on his right hand, which is equivalent to everyone else's left hand. Right? In other words, his right hand is his weak hand, so he puts tefillin on his right hand, even though by nature he's a righty, but because by nurture he's a lefty, he puts it. However, if he performs all activities with his right hand, except that he writes with his left hand, or vice versa, then the hand with which he writes is considered his right hand, and he therefore puts tefillin on the other hand. So if a person does everything, he throws balls with his left hand and whatever, everything he does, he eats with his left hand, but he writes with his right hand, then he's considered a righty. If he does everything with his right hand, but he writes with his left hand, he's considered a lefty. An ambidextrous person puts tefillin on his left hand. Now, if a person was not born left-handed, but later trained himself to write with his left hand, but he still performs all other activities with his right hand, he must put tefillin on his left hand. So even though we said before that and this is not so uncommon, I'll share an interesting anecdote. But let's just finish this. So even though we said before that if somebody writes with his left hand and does everything with his right hand, he's considered a lefty because he writes with his left hand. That's only if he is so by nature. But if it's by nurture that he trained himself, so then he only switches once he's trained himself to do everything with the other hand. If he's only trained himself to write with one hand, but he still does everything else with the other hand, then he is considered based on what his natural thing is, not what his nurture status is. I think I mentioned in the past that with regards to the intricacies of different scenarios of ambidextrous or people who change to do one thing with one hand and one thing with the other hand, there are a number of opinions, even situations where there is a disagreement within Chabad between the Alter Rebbe and his grandson, the Tzemach Tzedek. And so there are some very devout, pious Jews who wear tefillin on both hands, not simultaneously, but they wear tefillin, they daven regular, and then after davening, they take off that tefillin and put on tefillin on the other hand. Now, I once was somewhere where it was a fair, a Jewish fair, and we were there doing mitzvahim. And there was an individual, a colleague of mine, who approached somebody and asked him to put on tefillin, and that person was giving him a very hard time. He was giving him attitude and kind of basically, he was pulling out of the book arguments that the Misnagdim had against Chassidim 200 years ago and presenting them and getting all self-righteous, and the Vilna Gaon claimed this, and how could you claim that? And I decided to get involved because I thought this was like the irony of this guy who hasn't put on tefillin, but he's concerned with the Vilna Gaon's disagreements with the Chassidim. Anyway, so it turns out that person fit exactly this description here, that he was not born left-handed, but he had trained himself to write with his left hand, but still performed all other activities with his right hand. And the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch says he must put on tefillin on his left hand. But the Vilna Gaon, whom he was talking about, paskins otherwise. He says he puts on tefillin on his right hand. And this person specifically insisted to putting on tefillin on his right hand. And so in the end, he did put on tefillin only because he was able to put on tefillin in accordance with the opinion of the Vilna Gaon. Anyway, that was just an interesting experience that I once had. Okay. Any questions or comments on what we said until now before we continue? All right. Sifyud Gimel. The prescribed width of the tefillin straps, whether of the shalrosh or the shalyad, cannot be less than the length of a barley kernel. And he brings here in that, according to Reb Chaim Noah, which is the common practice, that is 10 millimeters, or possibly even, if necessary, even 9 millimeters. Now, like I've said, any ritzuas that you buy nowadays are going to be more than 10 millimeters, so it's not really a problem. Where it does get tricky is two things. First of all, the areas of the ritzuas that come under a lot of friction. So the middle of the head straps over here, where you tighten them, and also the area around the knotted tefillin of the what do you call it, of the hand. So they get stretched, and when they get stretched over time, they can become very thin and be less than 10 millimeters, in which case it's time to replace them. Then you have another issue is also around the area that has friction around especially the part that goes in and out of the loop by the hand tefillin. So even if it doesn't stretch to less than 10 millimeters or 9 millimeters, but sometimes the paint gets faded and you may not have 10 millimeters of black. Now, if looks black and then on closer inspection you see a little bit of dots which are not exactly black, that's not really of a concern. But sometimes it becomes completely worn out and there's no more, it's clear that there's no longer 10 millimeter width or 9 millimeter width of black, and then again it's time to paint them or to replace them. Another area of concern is not that it will be stretched or become discolored, but that it will become bent. So again, usually this would be around the area of the hand knot, where it goes through the tefillin, through the, that pass where the strap passes through the tefillin, and then in the knot, and out the knot, depending on which type of knot you have. So sometimes it might get bent and not be sort of spread out flat. I'm actually going to show you something on my tefillin. Just bear with me here. It may not be 100% flat, spread out to that area of 10 millimeters, and that's also something to be aware of. Actually, on my tefillin, on my Rabbeinu Tam's tefillin, I have this issue. It's not really an issue, but it's just something I'm reminded of. So I actually bought extra thick straps. These are, I think the average ones that you get are like 12 or 13 millimeters, and these are like 18 or something. So I got extra thick ones, and the main reason I got extra thick ones is because then this way, even if they stretch and they become narrower, they're still going to be wide enough. So it's just more durability. But if you see, I'm not sure how clear it is on the image on the video, but the part of the tefillin of the strap that goes through the tefillin can become bent. I'm trying to get an angle where you could see what I'm showing you. Yeah, you see here, it can become bent, and then it's very narrow. Can you see on the screen what I'm showing? So when I'm already in the habit of every day when I put on my Rabbeinu Tam's tefillin, I sort of bend it backwards and flatten it out to make sure that I have the full 10 millimeters spread out. So something to pay attention to around the knot area of your tefillin. If you see that it's getting bent, then you might want to flatten them or adjust the knot or have it fixed in a way that it should be spread out to be, the width of the barley, the 10 millimeters. The prescribed length is with shel rosh for both the right and left straps. Sorry, that's the width. Now, what about the length? So the prescribed length for the shel rosh for both the right and the left straps is that it be long enough to reach until the navel or slightly above it. Some authorities maintain that the right strap should extend until the milah, the circumcision. It is proper to follow the strict view as the best possible way to fulfill this mitzvah. So the length of the straps of the tefillin, of the head tefillin, but I think there are opinions that it can be even shorter than that, but certainly it should be at least until the navel, and if possible, even lower than that to the bris. It's also the custom, I don't know if you've ever paid attention to this, but probably, hopefully your tefillin are like this, that the right strap is longer than the left strap. Sometimes it's just a few inches longer. You might not sort of notice it, but pay attention tomorrow. You will see that most likely is that way. And also it's brought down in Chassidus that it's the custom to have the straps be as long as possible, just that they shouldn't drag on the ground. So if, they could have, many people will have them to the knees or even lower than the knees, and that's certainly recommended or admirable, but you just have to be careful that when you sit, that you lift them off the ground so they're not dragging on the ground. That's as far as the length of the head, the strap for the head tefillin. What about the length of the strap for the hand tefillin? The strap of the shaliyad must be long enough to tighten the bias to the muscle, to make 7 coils around the arm and 3 coils around the middle finger with enough left to tighten it. If the strap breaks, whether of the shalosh or the shaliyad, you should consult your local competent Orthodox rabbi. Now, the truth is that according to the Alter Rebbe, you don't need the hand tefillin to be so long. Even if the ritzua is shorter, as long as you can wrap it around the arm tightly, that's kosher. But the truth is that I think, this is my recollection from learning these halachas as a young boy. I'm not sure if this is 100% accurate, but it certainly makes sense. The knot of the hand tefillin, the way that we do in Chabad, the knot designed by the Alter Rebbe, is that this is a knot. This in and of itself is a complete knot. And so once you've tied it to your hand and you've pulled the knot and you've tightened it, that's it. It's tied. And so that's enough strap, so to speak, to have tied it to your arm. Whereas outside of Chabad, the most common knot that's used is not really a knot, it's just a loop. So you have a loop and the strap of the tefillin pulls through the loop, and then you sort of pull it the other way and you tighten it like that, and then you wrap it around your arm. Now, when you have to tie the tefillin, pulling a loop doesn't necessarily constitute tying it. So those who don't have the Chabad knot, how do they fulfill the idea of tying it? The answer is because at the end of, they wrap it around the arm and then around the hand, and then at the end they tuck it in. That tucking in constitutes the tying it. So that may be why if you don't have the Chabad knot, it's more important to have a longer strap and to make sure to tuck in the end. When you wrap it around your hand, certainly if you don't have the Alter Rebbe's knot, when you wrap it around your hand at the end, make sure that the end is tucked in and that it's tight. Okay, you should be careful. Care should be taken that the black side of the strap should face outwards. If it happens that the straps become inverted around your head or around the muscle of your arm so that the white side faces outwards, you must either fast or redeem yourself by giving tzedakah. So if that we're not talking here about the straps that come down. If they turn around, that doesn't matter. But if the strap, that one strap around your head, if part of that strap turns upside down, or the first ring around your arm, which is the one that's holding the tefillin in place, if that one turns upside down and the white side or the back side of the ritzua turns to the front, then that is considered a not good omen, and you should fast, or the Rebbe much more encouraged the second option always, not to fast, but to redeem it by giving tzedakah. Similarly, if the tefillin fell to the ground when they're not in their bag, you must also fast. But if they fell while they're in the bag, you need not fast, but you should give something to tzedakah. And also, if it's in the box, then that's also considered in the bag, and it's not the same as if the tefillin themselves fall. Okay. If you remove the tefillin because you need to go to the lavatory, when you return and put them on, you must again recite a bracha. However, if you are in the middle of Birchas Shema, if you're in the middle of the brachas of Shema, that is from the bracha of Yotzer or further, you should not interrupt by reciting the brachas over the tefillin, but put them on without reciting the brachas and following the Amidah. You should move them a bit and then recite the brachas. Now, practically speaking, there's much debate about this, but practically speaking, the custom is that if you went to the lavatory to urinate, then you do not say a bracha when you put them back on. But if you went for more than that, then you do say a bracha when you put them back on. And if you are at a place in davening where you are not able to make the bracha, then you put them on without a bracha, and later on you make the bracha. Now, if you look in the chart in the back of the siddur, which I don't have to reach, let me just get one. Hold on. So now we have in the back of the annotated siddur, in the back cover, it has the whole chart in English, and form of interruption is the bracha on putting on tefillin. So, you'll see there's some parts where you can say the bracha and some parts where it says put on and say the bracha at a later stage. So you could always check up there if that's if that thing. If you're going to be using a siddur which has already been bound, then you're going to have a problem because the middle column is covered with the white tape. But you can't have everything in life. Okay. Okay, here's an interesting one. What I want to do for this one, actually, I'm going to pull up on the screen the way the Alter Rebbe says these two halachas, and then we'll read it in the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. Hold on. Can you see what I'm doing on the screen right now? Okay. It is forbidden to divert one's attention from the tefillin even for a moment, as long as one is wearing them. This conclusion is derived from a comparison to the high priest's forehead plate. With regard to the forehead plate, it is written that it shall be on his forehead at all times. Now, obviously, the Kohen Gadol doesn't wear it on his forehead at all times. He only wears it when he's in the temple. So therefore, our sages understood this to mean that his mind, so long as he's wearing it, his mind should not be diverted from it. Now, the divine name appears only once in the forehead plate. So how much more so should tefillin, which contain numerous references to God's name, command our constant attention? Now, it used to be the original, the ideal way of doing the mitzvah, and indeed the original practice was to wear tefillin the entire day, not just for davening. You wore tefillin all day. You put it on in the morning. You went to work. You did whatever you had to do. You did with tefillin until evening. So, what does it mean that you shouldn't divert your attention? The diversion of attention, which is forbidden, is frivolity. I don't know how to put what's it, levity, whatever. Frivolity or preoccupation with physical concerns to the extent that one's heart turns away from the fear of God because of this distraction. If, however, one is steadfast in his reverence for God and engages in his own concerns, even as he involved in his work and his vacation, his attention is not focused directly on tefillin, he is not considered to have diverted his attention, right? In other words, you're going to work with your tefillin. So you're sitting in front of your computer and you're answering emails, right? So that doesn't matter. That's not called distraction from your tefillin, as long as you're not doing anything frivolous or inappropriate or, lightheaded. Any sort of that type of behavior is not that would be considered a distraction. But it doesn't actually mean that you have to have constant thinking about the tefillin all the time. Otherwise, because how would it be possible for anyone to wear tefillin throughout the day? In biblical and Talmudic times, it was customary to wear tefillin throughout the day. In the present era, with rare exceptions, this practice is no longer observed. Okay. Nevertheless, the choicest way, the best way of performing this mitzvah is not to divert one's attention from the tefillin at all. So that when you're wearing the tefillin, you should be constantly aware of the fact that you're wearing tefillin. Quite a tall order, except during the study of the Torah and the Shemoneh Esrei prayer, where you're supposed to focus your complete attention to what you're studying or what you're saying, and then even if you want to do it in the choicest way, you just keep up with the first level, which is not to behave inappropriately. Now, then he says, one is obligated to touch his tefillin at frequent intervals, i.e., whenever he recalls that he is wearing them, he should touch them. This will cause him to remember them continuously and prevent him from diverting his attention from them entirely. When he touches them, he should touch the arm tefillin first and then the head tefillin, so as not to bypass a mitzvah, for the arm tefillin are closer to his touch than the head tefillin. Now, strictly speaking, this is only during the day, not during davening, because during davening, you're davening. You don't need to touch your tefillin to remember. You're in the middle of davening. Obviously, you're not behaving frivolously. So one is not required to touch his tefillin during the time of prayer, for at that time there is no cause for concern that he will divert his attention from them entirely and become involved in levity and frivolity. Nevertheless, it's advisable that he touch them so that his attention actually become focused on them, and this is the preferred manner of doing the mitzvah. So it is advisable to touch your tefillin during davening also, and there are specific psukim throughout the davening where it's customary to touch the tefillin, and one of them the Alter Rebbe mentions here, it is worthy custom to touch the tefillin when one mentions this mitzvah during the recitation of the Shema, i.e. you should touch the arm tefillin when saying, and you should touch the head tefillin when saying, it's also customary to do so when we say and at a number of other places throughout the Siddur. Okay, now let's go back and let's read that in the words of the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. As long as you are wearing your tefillin, your attention must be diverted from them. It must not be diverted from them, even for a moment, except while praying the Amidah and while studying Torah. It is forbidden to eat a regular. It is forbidden to eat a regular meal while wearing tefillin, but eating a snack is permissible, right? So sometimes you'll see, if you go to Chassidus B'S Medrash and somebody has yahrzeit and they give some tikkun, they give a l'chaim and a mazonos, you'll see that some people have the custom to say l'chaim and mazonos while they're wearing the tefillin, and that's permissible as long as they're not having a whole breakfast, they're just having a little l'chaim. But taking even a very short nap while wearing tefillin is forbidden, because when you're eating, you can stay in control that you may only eat a small amount. But if you have a small nap, then there's a concern that the small nap may go into an even bigger nap. And there's also the concern that while you're napping, you're not going to be in control of your bodily functions, and you may do things which are inappropriate to do in tefillin, which I assume he's going to, later on, he's going to talk about how to keep one's body clean when we wear tefillin. You must touch the tefillin each time you think of them, because by doing so, you will not have your thoughts diverted. You should first touch the shalosh and then the shalyad and then the shalosh. It's a beautiful custom to touch them when you mention the mitzvah during the recitation of Shema. When you read Ukshatam Lo Yisrael Decha, you touch the shalyad and then kiss your hand. And then when you touch the head one, you do the head and kiss your hand, right? So in the Alter Rebbe, we didn't see anything about kissing. It just said about touching. The Kitzur Shulchan Aruch adds about kissing, and indeed that is the custom. And you can see in the videos how the Rebbe used to. The Rebbe didn't do it. Yeah, here he says you touch the hand one and kiss it, touch the head one and kiss it. The way the Rebbe did it, from what I recall seeing in the videos, is that the Rebbe touched the hand one, then touched the head one, and then the Rebbe actually touched with 3 fingers. He touched the 3 head tefillin with 3 fingers, and then touched 2 fingers to his eyes, and then kissed the middle finger. For what it's worth. Okay. Okay, I think we're going to pause here for today, and we'll see you tomorrow night for the Likutei Sichos class, and next week for the continuation of Kitzur Shulchan Aruch.
Okay, Rabbi, thank you.
Thank you.